never done anything like this before. I've written 3 New York Times best-selling books. I've been interviewed on countless TV shows, and I've been invited to Washington to meet political leaders. Yet I've never released my own private research to the general public in this way before. But then, this is possibly the greatest story and the most urgent situation of my entire career. And it's a story only I can tell, because I'm the only person in this business, possibly in the entire industry, who has been watching this situation from the very beginning. You see, what most people don't realize is that in the 1950s, the United States began switching over to an entirely new kind of economic system. And no, I'm not talking about the end of the gold standard. That happened in the 70s. This new system has allowed us to amass more wealth on paper than any other nation in history. Despite the collapse of our industrial sector in the 70s, despite our manufacturing base moving overseas, resulting in lost jobs and broken towns all over America, despite 2 major market crashes in just 15 years, the new system made our economy what it is. It's what keeps our lights on, our grocery stores, shelves stocked, our gas stations fueled, our Social Security checks in the mail, and our investments producing gains. And if you've ever wondered how we managed to keep going despite every sign pointing to a coming collapse, this is it. The trouble is that over 30 years ago, I noticed a fatal flaw in this system. And as this system keeps growing, so too does the flaw. It keeps growing bigger and bigger all the time. And now, I believe we're past the point of no return. When this house of cards collapses, which it will, a systemic shock will disrupt our lives in ways you never thought possible. You will suddenly be locked out of your own bank account, unable to withdraw cash or deposit a check. Your stocks will swing wildly out of control. You won't even be able to access your Social Security money. Like a virus, it will spread to our food supply chain, causing massive shortages in the cities and suburbs. The same thing will happen to our gas network. America's highways will become quiet and empty. And one by one, every service you come to depend on, from your bank to your grocery store to our federal government, will shut down. You won't be able to get cash, and without cash, you won't be able to buy food or gasoline. And what happens to America then? As a society, we are now more than ever dependent on convenience, on free government services instead of our own hard work, on credit instead of our own hard-earned cash. What happens when people can't use their credit cards? When they can't drive to get their checks because there's no gas? When the only thing you can count on is cash, and no one seems to have any of it? Will you be able to rely on your neighbors, your fellow citizens? Well, lately I'm not so sure. Now I realize that to someone who hasn't been studying this for 35 years, the idea of a serious crisis like that hitting America may not seem possible. After what I'm about to tell you, I think you'll reconsider. Quote, literally, your ATM wouldn't work. You type in your code, no money comes out. You get your paycheck, you can't cash it, close. Those are the words of the architect of the 2008 bank bailouts, Treasury Department insider Neil Kashkari. What he's describing is a crisis that you and I came very close to experiencing just a few years ago. If it sounds similar to what I'm describing, it's for a good reason. Former Secretary of the Treasury, Tim Geithner, has stated, "We came exceptionally close. You could hear the fear and the panic. Because anybody living in that world at that time, running a business at that time, knew that we were on the edge of losing the capacity to function. This has been confirmed by former Secretary of the Treasury Hank Paulson, as well as two former congressmen. And while President Obama assured Americans that, quote, the shadow of the crisis has passed in his State of the Union address, I recently came across video footage of Janet Yellen, the current chairwoman of the Federal Reserve, openly admitting that the U.S. is still facing a very real threat. We could find ourselves in a devastating spiral, says Janet Yellen. She goes on to assure everyone that the Federal Reserve is fully in control of the situation. But the truth is that by their own standards, the Fed's policies have not worked. In fact, official records indicate that the highest levels of our government have already spent $4.5 trillion trying to contain this, more than we spent on World War II. It's a desperate move. I don't think they'll be successful. As I write, the U.S. economy is in a slump. This is despite the biggest stimulus of new cash and credit in history. We have fewer real breadwinner jobs today than we did 15 years ago. And the typical household has less income. But let me back up for a second and explain exactly what it is we're facing and how we got here in the first place. By now, I bet you've already heard more than a few over-the-top conspiracies and wacky theories from people who don't have all the facts. Maybe you've even watched a few specific dates where the beginning of a crisis come and go, and if so, you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there who know deep down that something's not right in America, that it's been a different place since 2008. Yet they can't quite put their finger on what exactly is happening or what's coming next. Because it's not Obama, it's not the national debt, it's not a currency threat, there's a much deeper problem. That's why the hundreds of internet experts you've probably heard from are usually wrong. They only point at the symptoms, not the real threat. Meanwhile, the mainstream media is almost completely ignoring the danger we're in. They just don't understand it. Between that and the official recovery story coming out of Washington, it's no small wonder that the vast majority of Americans still have no idea about the threat our own government is spending trillions of dollars trying to contain. But then, that's why my company exists. That's what brings me here today, to tell you the truth as we see it. And the truth is, what's wrong with America didn't start in 2008 or in the decade before that. Let me start from the beginning, when I first discovered a terrible secret about our economy. As I mentioned before, I started out in politics. In Washington, D.C., I ran one of the most influential lobbying groups of its era, the National Taxpayers Union, all the while attending law school at Georgetown University in the evenings. We brought one of the largest class action lawsuits ever against the Secretary of the Treasury, and we lobbied state governments to pass balanced budget amendments. The New York Times, March 6, 1981, describes the story. The drive to propose a constitutional amendment requiring the federal budget to be balanced has started up again. The National Taxpayers Union, leading the effort nationally, said it believed that 4 more states could be found to pass the proposal this year. While fighting to reduce the national debt, I attended Reagan's inaugural ball. I was introduced to Ron Paul for the first time. I gave Grover Norquist, one of the most powerful lobbyists in America today, his first job in the city. I found myself having lunch with Margaret Thatcher and Milton Friedman. But frankly, I was never one for the backslapping that goes on in D.C., and I never believed enough in partisan politics or in the power of big government to fit in with the Beltway crowd. And I've since had a change of heart about our national debt. To be blunt, I no longer believe it is the greatest threat to this country. Don't get me wrong, I still think it's an important issue, and one we've been deeply involved with here at Agora. For example, our documentary on the subject, I-O-USA, which includes interviews with Warren Buffett, Alan Greenspan, Ron Paul, and me, and others, was screened at the Sundance Film Festival and widely praised by critics. In fact, after seeing the film, Roger Ebert made it one of his top 5 documentary films of that year, writing, quote, "A letter to our grandchildren. I have just seen a documentary titled I-O-U-S-A that snapped into sharp focus why your lives may not be as pleasant as ours." But while I recognize